All right. So welcome everyone to the SHRF Establishment Grant Information webinar. Um, I am not Pawan Kumar, but he is unwell today, so I'm stepping in to fill in. So I'm Chelsea Cunningham. I am another programs manager here at SHRF. And I'm not running the establishment grant this year, but I have in the past, so I'm still fairly familiar with all the information that Pawan was going to share today. And as always, you can ask questions here in the webinar and I'll do my best to answer, or you can email Paulwyn anytime with your questions. And then one other housekeeping thing, I am working from home today with the blizzard warnings here in Saskatoon. And naturally, my cat has decided this is the exact moment she wants to start zooming around the house. So I don't think the microphone is picking her up, but if it does, I apologize. And then with that, we'll get into the presentation portion. SHRF is located in Saskatoon, which is Treaty 6 territory and the homeland of the Métis. But SHRF does serve the entire province of Saskatchewan and the vast number of peoples that live here. Here at SHRF, we are always trying to be mindful of our role in reconciliation and how our processes and activities might be able to do better. And we encourage everyone to take a moment and think about how reconciliation plays into their work as well. So for today, our agenda is I'll do a fairly brief introduction of SHRF and what it is we do and all of that, since for establishment grants, you are probably fairly new to your position and to the province of Saskatchewan. So the establishment grant we really hope is just an entry point and that we continue to see your research and fund your research for years to come. That will include, so I'll talk a little bit about our other grants and our goals, and then I'll get into the actual establishment grant overview, the patient-oriented research funding portion, the application and review process, and then some key dates and contexts. I will answer questions at the end. You can pop them in the chat as we go, but I just won't be looking at that until the very end, just so you know. And I'll try to leave a good amount of time for questions at the end. There we go. So first, the Saskatchewan Health Research Foundation, or SHRF, is the provincial agency that supports health research and supports and funds health research in Saskatchewan. So the vast majority of our budget comes from the provincial government through Innovation Saskatchewan. So we work to build research capacity and collaboration in the province and invest in projects that create impact for the people and communities in Saskatchewan. So some of these goals that we try to support is to build capacity in the province through the establishment grant specifically for the most part, supporting the early career researchers establishing themselves here. We also try to promote collaboration across cross-sector partnerships and impact of evidence-based knowledge into practice for better health outcomes. So we kind of group our grants into four buckets. So we have a capacity program, which is supporting researchers and trainees to build capacity. We have a solutions program where we have an innovation and impact grant. This one funds projects specifically with the goal that the projects are finding solutions for real problems in Saskatchewan. We also have a connections program that fosters collaboration with stakeholders outside of academia. And then a partnerships program where we partner with other funders, whether national or charities or other similar organizations interested in promoting research, to try to maximize our money and to provide a greater variety of funding programs for researchers here in Saskatchewan. So today we're focusing on capacity with the establishment grant. So as I mentioned, the specific objective of Establishment Grant is to support early career researchers. We define that as researchers within the first 5 years of their initial qualifying appointment. So if you've had an assistant professor or equivalent position elsewhere before coming to Saskatchewan, that still counts towards your eligible time window. Our focus is on all areas of human health. So we welcome applicants from all fields, sectors, methodologies, etc. If your research has a proposed impact to improve human health, it will fit in the establishment grant. And then the specific amount in term, we have 150,000 over 3 years. You are able to propose a shorter grant if that's what fits for you. It's just making sure that the amount requested tracks with the activities and the amount of time you're proposing. So if you just want a 2-year grant, that is perfectly fine. Just make sure that your budget is adjusted accordingly. In that 2-year grant, you can still request the full amount. So the principal applicant eligibility. So generally, we have a definition of principal applicant for all our grants in our SHRF funding guide. And this essentially just specifies that you have to be a self-directed autonomous researcher. So essentially, you can't be a trainee or a contracted employee. You have to be the one responsible for your research and the direction. But you do still have to have the appointment with an institution that has a memorandum of understanding with SHRF, because that memorandum of understanding or MOU is how we ensure that ethics and all other policies are being monitored and adhered to. I have a list of those institutions on the next slide, I believe. And then specifically for establishment grant, as I mentioned, you need to be within the first 5 years of your research-related appointment. And you should, so that's within 5 years as of July 1st, 2026. So I believe that means your position can have started July 1st, 2021, if I'm doing my math correctly there. But then with a note that we will consider exceptions. So if you've been completing other training relevant to your position, you've had career interruptions where you've had to pivot away from research for one reason or another. Major career transitions would be similar, or any kind of parental leave, leaves of absences. Those are all things that we will take into consideration if you provide that information with your application for consideration. And this other requirement that's part of the qualifying appointment and our principal applicant definition. So you have to be able to hold peer review funds, publish research, and work in Saskatchewan during the funding period. Most of these, if you have an appointment at an MOU institution, those are covered. But just if you're not sure, we do specify that it's an assistant professor or equivalent. So if you're trying to fit under the or equivalent section, checking those requirements off can be helpful to confirm that it is an equivalent position. Yeah, so these are the list of institutions that currently have a memorandum of understanding with SHRF. So got the universities, the health authority, and then some of the colleges in Saskatchewan. They all have a research office, so we do recommend reaching out to them as well to confirm eligibility and your appointment. The research office will have to sign an approval page for your application indicating that they're going to hold the funding for you, so never hurts to reach out early and make sure everything's in order. So first up, when you think you're eligible, and you come to SHRF, and the first step will be the eligibility check done in our research management system. So the reason we do an eligibility check first is first to confirm that you are eligible. It saves everyone headaches down the road instead of getting you to do a full application. And then it turns out that the position wasn't an eligible thing. And it also helps us figure out who might be applying so that we can get our peer review committees together with the relevant expertise for your applications. So as I mentioned, the eligibility check is done through our research management system. Um, this system, it does all of our application review and grant management things. So if you're not familiar with it yet, you will be soon. The eligibility check is fairly straightforward. You just need to put information about your position and when you started the position. There is space to list any extenuating circumstances for extension to your eligible window. And then we do ask for a project overview and a brief description of the fit with the program. This isn't set in stone. Again, that information is more to help us put together the review committee to make sure we have the relevant expertises to review the applications we're going to receive. So if you put in a project overview with a title and a summary that shifts slightly as you move to the full application and work on that, that's totally fine. It's just to help us figure out who needs to look at your application in order to make sure it gets a fair review. At the eligibility check, you can add your co-applicants, but they're not required. The eligibility check, we're only looking at your eligibility as principal applicant. Um, and then if you add co-applicants, they won't have their contribution forms to complete yet. They'll just have to accept the email invitation. And then once you move through eligibility, the contribution forms will be generated. Contribution forms are something I will touch on further into this presentation as well. They tend to cause headaches for people, so I'll spend a little bit more time on them, I think. Yeah, the eligibility, so that's just reviewed internally by us. Again, just checking to make sure everything's in order before you do all the work of a full application. And it's a rolling intake, so you have to have it submitted by January 23rd. That should say 2026. But if you submit it earlier, we will look at it as soon as we're able. And once you're approved, you have access to the full application. So that gives you a little extra time with the application to work on it. So we do encourage you to submit early, but we know that's not always how things work. And then just that note there that for straightforward cases, we'll just approve it and you'll be put through. If there are exceptions being requested, we may contact you just to follow up and get some further information if we need it prior to a final decision. Oh, I almost forgot. Um, so in addition to the information about your position, we do ask you to upload a CV so that we're able to confirm the position. For the full application, we have SHRF templates that we use now, but for eligibility, it's fine to upload just whatever CV you have on hand. At this point, we're not worried about its in application quality um, effect. We're just looking for some kind of confirmation that we can be like, oh yeah, this is your first assistant professor job, um, and it started this date, perfect. So yeah, don't spend a lot of time formatting a CV for eligibility. As I mentioned, there's no minimum team requirements. We are only looking at principal applicants for the eligibility. But you are more than welcome to apply with co-applicants. And then just with a little asterisk of another note that we don't allow co-principal applicants for this grant competition. You should be applying as the main applicant responsible for all direction of the research program. So co-applicants and mentors, any of that are welcome, but they can't be listed as co-principal applicants. And so then just to expand a bit on what I mean for SHRF when I refer to co-applicants. So this is where you add any team members who are contributing to the direction of the project, whether that's or scientific, cultural, or intellectual direction of the project. So we have three descriptors of co-applicants that we consider all of these falling under the co-applicant role and should be added there. So that's where you'd add your researchers, your knowledge users, and your people with lived experience. If you are a patient-oriented project with patient partners on the grant, that's where they would fit as well. In addition to your co-applicants, you can also add your personnel to the grant when you apply. Again, it's not required, but it does help the committee see a little bit more of the feasibility that you already have these personnel needed in place. This is also where if someone is being compensated from the grant funds, they should be added as personnel, since generally co-applicants should not be compensated from grant funds. And finally, we also have a role for supporters. So there may be some overlap with supporters and co-applicants who are knowledge users or people with lived experience. But generally, the supporters, I say, are the people who are interested in your project but are not as involved. So this might be a nonprofit that's like, yeah, this research would be great, and knowing the outcomes would help us in some format, but them themselves at the nonprofit are not participating in the grant or helping you develop the research grant question or anything like that. We also, the supporters is a good place to put individuals or organizations who are providing a very specific, limited or defined role in the project. The supporters will all upload a letter of support, so that's where they can specify what their contribution will be. If it's to provide you space or to help you recruit participants, a letter attesting to that always helps out in review, because it shows the feasibility and buy-in from these supporters. Oh yeah, and then I'll expand a little bit on these co-applicant descriptors because I'm just throwing around the term knowledge user without defining it. So I already noted that grant funds should not be used to compensate co-applicants, with an exception that we do allow some time release for knowledge users or honoraria for people with lived experience. So you're probably all pretty familiar. A researcher is the individual with formal training and holds a position which supports them to pursue research. Um, Much less strict than the principal applicant definition. They can be from any institution, any type of position, just a formal position of some kind that supports them to pursue research. Our knowledge users at SHRF, we define them as individuals interested in the applications of the knowledge generated from the proposed research. So for some projects, this would be a clinician who may be adjusting their treatment practices based on the outcomes of the research. It might be a nonprofit who's tailoring their services they provide to the community based on the research. Essentially, anyone who can use that knowledge and take it and use it to improve their own health or the health of others. And then finally, the people with lived experience are individuals who are supporting the project through their own personal experience with a health issue or experience as an informal caregiver. This helps make sure that outcomes are relevant to patients, and it's something that is of interest to them and informed by them. So that is a good segue into this extra section. So we have an establishment grant budget, but then within that we have, I think it's, oh, I forgot to double check. I think it's two grants dedicated for patient-oriented research in collaboration with the Saskatchewan Centre for Patient-Oriented Research. So it's an extra check mark that you can add if you want to be considered for the patient-oriented research funding specifically. And then if you are determined to meet the patient-oriented research funding requirements, and you are the top ranked in the peer review competition, you'll be designated the peer review funding for your grant. Um, if you apply for the patient-oriented research funding and are not the top-ranked patient-oriented application, you're still considered as normal within the regular establishment envelope, and we allocate the funding top-down according to the score. And there's a note here that if you are interested in this Skipper trainee funding, I do encourage you to reach out to Pawan or Karen to ask your questions because this is new and I'm not as familiar with it. But if I remember correctly, the successful patient-oriented research funding awardee can apply for Skipper for their trainee funding without needing the matching funding requirement. If you get an establishment grant, but you're not the patient-oriented research funding awardee, you can still apply for Skipper for the trainee funding, but then you have to have matching funding for that trainee. Pretty sure. Again, any questions about that, don't hesitate to reach out. And then in order to be considered for the patient-oriented research funding, you have to show that you have meaningful engagement of patients and people with lived experience. There are some new application questions that are optional this year, where you can discuss these to show the engagement. You also have to have a minimum of 2 patient partners on the team. So in SHRF terms, that would be 2 people with lived experience as co-applicants. And then otherwise, you're peer reviewed, everything's the same, but you will receive some additional patient partner feedback from a patient partner review panel. Okay, so next up is the application section and how to apply. So this is the homepage from the research management system I keep referring to. It's shrf.smartsimple.ca, I believe. If you haven't already, you will have to register and create an account. And once you have one, this will be your home base for everything SHRF. Once you have created your account, submitted your eligibility, passed your eligibility, you will have access to the full application in the RMS. And so here we have a breakdown of everything that you'll have to prepare for this application. So there's space to upload your research proposal. For establishment, we allow 10 pages. That includes any figures that you want embedded in the proposal. There is a supplementary materials section for additional information and figures, but it is not required by the peer review committee to read the supplementary materials. So if it's something that's really critical to understanding your proposal, we recommend trying to get it to fit in that 10 pages. That 10 pages does not include your references. We have a separate references section where you can upload those. There's also a text box in the application where you can discuss the sex and gender considerations for your project. There is an upload field for a 1-page timeline. We ask that it's a visual timeline, so something like a Gantt chart usually works well. A note on timelines is that we've been instructing our review committees to give some leeway on the timeline. They should be realistic, but also we realize, especially with like community-minded and patient-oriented research projects, working with with communities and with non-academic people who live very busy lives and have their own things going on, they don't go according to schedule. So it's okay if it's not 100% realistic in your timeline, but try to do it as if it was a timeline that was realistic if everything went absolutely perfectly. We do allow no-cost extensions, so if it turns out that scheduling a meeting to consult with the community took a lot longer, that's okay. And we try to let the review committees know correspondingly. You will also be required to upload a dean or department letter of support. Um, so for some people that have either multiple appointments or cross appointments, it's sometimes a little bit of a question of who should be writing this. It should be whoever is best able to speak to the resources your institution is providing you. So the things covered in this should be things like your lab space or your protected time for research, your startup package, things like that. So whoever is within leadership that can best speak to that for you is probably who you should approach for this letter. I already mentioned the references are uploaded separately. We have a whole tab for the budget and justification. For the budget, there's an Excel parser file that you download from the RMS, fill it in, not changing any of the headings because then the system doesn't upload it, recognize it when you re-upload it. The budget Excel has columns for 5 years, but you just use the number of years that are relevant for your project. And then the Excel has all your budget amounts, and then you get a separate, I think it's 2 pages, to write and explain why the budget amounts are what they are. So that's where you can explain the students you're hiring, what level they're at, what their pay would be, the breakdown of the number of consumables, etc., that you need. And then I mentioned the research office signature previously, so that is signed by your institution research office, indicating that they are going to administer the funding on your behalf if you are successful. And then we also have the contribution forms, which, do I have them? I think I have a slide for them later, so I'll come back to them again. But as a note, the contribution forms are completed. There's one for every person you invite to your application, whether they're a co-applicant, personnel, or supporter. The requirements vary a little bit depending on what role they are invited into. But generally, if they're a co-applicant, they will need a CV or a resume. Okay, so a little more detail. Pawan has some detail here on the dean and department letter of support. So as I mentioned, basically they're just confirming what the institution is doing to support you um, in establishing your program of research here in the province. And this also works to confirm your start date, if applicable. So that's what if you are incoming to Saskatchewan, but you're not here yet, that just confirms that you will have the position by the time the funding is supposed to start. Um, yeah, I think that covers that. Are we? Oh yeah, there's contribution forms. Okay. So, and then allowable expenses in your budget. So we do allow for equipment purchases in establishment, but we ask that they are justified. If you are able to borrow or use equipment, um, that is usually best practices. We also limit the cost of knowledge, academic focused knowledge sharing. So things like your peer review publication fees, academic conferences, travel, is limited to 10% of your total budget. So that's $15,000. Um, the knowledge user time release allowance is also there to allow them to participate in research activities. So this is another one that I do encourage you to reach out if it's something you're considering in your budget. Generally, this would be for things like if you have a nurse working on your project to help you collect data from patients, that will take away from her regular work time. You can use the knowledge release to pay her employer to release her time to do this work for you. We also don't allow any costs explicitly associated with preparing future grant applications. So this isn't things like your trainee working on a project to collect data for a future grant. This is meant to be things like hiring an outside grant writer to write you a pretty grant or cost to have a team meeting with coffee in order to discuss the grant application with your collaborators. Um, but then again, I think that's an exception there that if you're meeting with the community to discuss the grant, then that's allowable. Um, Questions on this one are also welcomed if it's not clear or you're not sure. And then finally in the budget, you have the Excel and the justification. There's also another section where you can list in-kind and other sources of funding. So those are always also very helpful for the research committee, the peer review committee when they're looking at feasibility. If you're proposing a huge project and the establishment funding is only covering a small part of it, knowing where the activities are being funded elsewhere helps reassure them that everything is going to happen as planned for you. And it also provides you a chance to discuss any overlap to make sure that um, there's no overlap essentially between the different grants. Okay, contribution forms. I keep talking about those and finally going to fully explain them. So as I mentioned, all project roles, so that's everyone invited to your application will get a contribution form generated for them. Um, so first you invite someone to your application by email. They will get an email notification that they have to go create an account if they don't already have one, and then accept the application, indicating that they are consenting to participate in your grant application. Once that's done, a contribution form is generated for them, which asks some information about their role in the project, the number of hours per week they anticipate contributing, and upload a document depending on their role. The contribution forms can be completed and submitted by the co-applicant or supporter in question. But after they've accepted the invitation, USPI are also able to access these contribution forms. So if you want to collect the information for your team and upload and submit it, that also works. Um, this is a change we put in a couple of years ago, and we're finding it helps people a lot. Just because the learning curve on using the system is sometimes a little bit steep, especially for people that aren't in the system regularly applying for grant applications. So if it is a team member who is a co-applicant, so that means they're a researcher, a knowledge user, or a person with lived experience. Their contribution form will ask them to upload a CV if they're the researcher or knowledge user, or a testimonial if they're a person with lived experience. Um, SHRF has started using our own CV template, which is found at shrf.ca/resources, because I don't think this isn't used anymore, but CIHR and the tri-agencies are doing away with the Canadian Common CV and shifting towards a more narrative CV format. So um, until they figure out exactly what they're doing, we've just created our own narrative CV template. The goal is that the heading should be general enough that as long as it follows the SHRF formatting rules, any other CV, narrative CV template you have should approximately fit in ours, just being mindful of the formatting rules and the page limit. And then the testimonial also has some instructions on our resources page, but it's very open-ended. I think it's just, we ask it's approximately half a page or a paragraph long. It can be written or an audio file can also be submitted. We try to keep the barriers low, so whatever works for your people with lived experience. If you have any questions about accommodating needs for your team, just let us know. For personnel who are invited to the application, they just fill out a little text box about their role in the project. They don't have to upload a CV or any other documentation. And if they are invited as a supporter, they upload a letter of support. I don't think there's a page limit on that. I think they can be whatever format, whatever length they want to upload. All uploads to the RMS should be PDFs though. I think except testimonials. The testimonials will accept Word documents. Okay, so I think that's most of what I had for the application process. I see there's a few questions popping up in the chat, but I'll look at them when I get to the end. I'm getting close now. We have a little bit of information on our peer review process, which is always helpful to look at the review criteria and know how your application's getting scored, while you're writing the application. Our peer review process, we recruit a multidisciplinary committee from across Canada. We assign two lead reviewers for each application. And then for establishment, we also recruit some additional external reviewers. Um, because it is a multidisciplinary committee, we use the eligibility check to recruit matching expertise the best we can. But especially as this competition's for early career researchers, we want to make sure you're getting good specific feedback for your field as well. And those external reviewers are recruited to be experts in the field that you're working in. So they can provide some additional context if the committee um, is not as sure about some things within your specific field. The lead reviewers, they give you a preliminary score out of 5 on a 5-point scale. So 5 is outstanding, and then lower than 2 is needs revisions, I believe. And SHRF is committed to excellence. So in order to be considered for funding, you need to have scored above a 3.5 overall by the committee. 3.5 is our funding cutoff. So um, once the committee has met, discussed, and assigned a final score out of 5, we allocate the funding top down, starting with the highest and going all the way down, either until the funding is all spent or until we've reached that 3.5 cutoff, at which point we don't fund any further grants. So Pauline's got some notes here about the review criteria. These are also outlined in a lot more detail in the application package. I do recommend reading them carefully. We have weighted 30% for applicant potential. So that is the things regarding yourself as an applicant specifically. So there's some considerations there of, do you have collaborations? Has your career been following a logical um, progression? Um, Also, if there's a career transition, does the work you've done previously lend itself logically to what you are interested in now? They also look at productivity. We do try to encourage our committees to be more inclusive. So productivity in the traditional scientific productivity sense, but also in community and other non-academic settings. And then leadership as well is factored in there. 50% of your scoring should come from the quality of the proposed research. So that's things like the rationale and originality, your approach and methods, feasibility and budget all factor in there. And then finally, the potential impact of the proposed research, we weight at 20%. So that's your knowledge mobilization and knowledge translation plans. The contribution of research, I believe that's meant to be the contribution of research to either the state of knowledge as a whole, to community health, those different buckets of impact. We also asked them to consider the relevance to Saskatchewan, and any other research impacts that may be coming from your work. I believe you get a section in the application to specifically address research impacts. So some key points. Um, Please read the application package. I know it's fairly long and wordy, but most of the words are there because we carefully considered and needed them there. So there's not a lot of extra information in there that serves no purpose. So it is always recommended to read that through. The SHRF funding guide also has any policies that apply to SHRF grants as a whole. So it can clarify some things about allowable expenses, co-applicants, and things like that if the application package isn't as clear as it could be. For the background and rationale, make sure that your background and rationale are connecting and flowing with the rest of your proposal. A strong rationale really makes a difference to the reviewers when they're reviewing it, um, knowing how you got to your research question and how the research question will address the gap in knowledge, is very, very important. Make sure that you have your team roles um, prepared and what did I want to say about that? Sorry. I think this is the one where he's trying to highlight that you want to make sure that you have any expertise you need supporting you to do this research. So the review committee does look at things like if you have someone mentoring you, but they will also look at interdisciplinary collaborations, knowledge user supporters, basically just making sure that you are um, in with the people that you will need to be successful in your area. Make it easy to read. That's a little more straightforward note. So these are multidisciplinary committees. So you might not be writing at the same level as you would for a more targeted committee. So you're not writing in lay terms or anything like that by any means, but it should be able to follow by anyone in adjacent fields to your research as well. Careful of your formatting. It makes a big difference in readability as well, even if it's technically following SHRF's formatting rules. If the formatting's making it harder to read, the review committee's just not going to have as good a time, and that will affect the score, unfortunately. Check your math. So they do look at your budgets. So make sure that your budget justification and your Excel's matching. Everything's adding up as it should. Your budget Excel total amount should be the amount you're requesting from SHRF. If you have budget lines and amounts that are coming from other sources, don't put that into the bigger budget Excel, put that in the other funding section. Field test your application. So this one is a recommendation to just get some other people to read your application before it's submitted. Again, this ties into the multidisciplinary committee tip that sometimes you write something and you're so far into your research and you know this is what you want to do and you know why. But sometimes an outside pair of eyes reads it and they just don't quite see it with the same lens. So having that perspective helps a lot in making sure your application flows and makes sense. So whether you have some more senior researchers in your department that can help, or a research facilitator, just someone to have a second pair of eyes on it is very helpful. And then finally, check your contribution forms prior to deadline day. So these contribution forms and the invitations before the contribution forms rely on your team members to an extent to get things done. And if there are any invitations or contribution forms that are still pending submission at deadline day, the system will bounce your application with an error, an incomplete error. So double check, save yourself the panic on deadline day. Yeah. Oh, and then here's just a reminder of the deadlines. So as I mentioned, there's the eligibility check cutoff in January. We take up to a week if there's any follow-up we need. So if you submit on the 22nd and something's not correct or we're missing something, don't worry, we'll reach out and double check and we'll have up to a week to fix anything we need. And then March is the full application deadline. And then we do the peer review throughout the spring, and we will have funding decisions to you by June 19th. If you are one of the ones funded, you get to pick your start date. We do this to accommodate if you are very new to your position. So you can pick whether you want to start right away on July 1st or as late as October 1st of the following fall. So yeah, I'm filling in for Paulin today, but he's still the program manager on this. So email questions to him. Um, he's not well today and tomorrow, so um, might be best to email fundinginfo.ca or sorry, fundinginfo@shrf.ca just to make sure that if he's not in today, me and Karen are also able to answer. And then generally Tanya handles all our SHRF RMS technical support. So if you're having problems gaining access to the application or someone's not able to find their invitation for some reason, she's the one that can help you there. And I think that is my presentation. So I will open the chat now, and we still have 15-ish minutes for questions. Okay, so is there a preferred CV format? So yes, that is the SHRF CV template is on our website on shrf.ca/resources. Oh, and I see Miriam has their hand raised. I think you should be able to unmute
Yeah,
and ask it.
yeah. Hello, how are you, Chelsea? Thank you.
Good.
Just I'm gonna follow up with one question I asked in the chat, which Pawan answered about PhD and MSc students that he mentioned we are able to fund through this project. Do they have to do we have to know who the student is before we apply, or can we say it's intended to hire or have a PhD or MSc student?
Yeah, you can say that you intend to hire.
Okay.
So as I mentioned, like having your personnel and trainees can help with the feasibility, but like it's not expected by any means. Again, the reviewers know you're all fairly new to your positions, so you may
So
not have recruited yet.
they would be trainees or personnel, the students who would qualify as personnel.
Yes, yeah. So personnel and trainees, so under personnel, that would be either your research staff, but also your grad students. I would list there if you have them. If you don't have them, then just pop them in the budget and say that you intend to hire a master's.
Or a PhD. Okay.
Mhm.
And I just have one more question because
Yep.
this is like in your first 3 years and the funding is for 3 years, right? So if I apply let's say in my second year as an assistant professor, then am I only able to use the funding for 2 years or can I still use it for three
Oh yeah,
years?
no,
Does that
you
make
still
sense?
get the full 3 years
Okay.
whenever it's awarded.
Okay, so it doesn't have to be in my first year. I can
No.
apply in my third year and I still get 3 years.
Yeah,
Okay. Thank you. Sorry.
yeah, no problem. Yeah, it looks like Pauline's been busy in the chat for me. So there's a question there too about feedback from us prior to application. We are able to provide feedback regarding the fit with the program and completeness. Um, but in terms of subjective feedback of like, is this like good for my field, things like that, we tend to stay away from just to kind of keep a um, layer of um, unbiasedness, if that makes sense.
I meant like before the deadline application, do you provide like feedback, like maybe add this to make it stronger, add that to make it stronger,
Um,
or no?
Not so much, not in terms of strengthening it. It would just be in terms of does this meet the requirement or like would this make sense to the committee?
Okay.
Does that kind of make sense? Like we kind of try to keep off the side of like very specific advice.
Mhm.
We can just kind of guide you on whether it's meeting the objectives, if it's interpreting the review criteria correctly, maybe. Um, but generally, we don't read the full application and provide general feedback. It'd be a very specific question-based feedback we could do.
Okay.
Yeah. And then last one in the chat is, will we have access to this presentation after it's done? Yes, so this is being recorded. I forgot to mention at the beginning. We do typically chop the question period off. So if you don't want your question on SHRF's YouTube, it won't be. It's all good. But after Tanya gets this up on YouTube, I usually send a PDF of the slides and the recording link and a reminder of the other resources I've been mentioning and our emails to everyone who's registered. And then, so I got a hand up from Irfan.
Hi, Chelsea. Good afternoon.
And yeah.
Nice to see you again. And thank you very much for the all the description. It was nice, even though I was looking little bit of the handouts and everything. As you mentioned, is too much, but the summary is good. I think one of the yeah, I think you already mentioned that the presentation will be available. I'm sorry, I maybe missed it, right? Okay, that would be great. So I have two quick things to know. So is there any kind of statistics you guys have that what is the success rate of this establishment grant so far, or roughly?
So it depends each year on how many applications we get. Our budget for this is typically 1.2 million, I think. So that translates to 8 grants that we can fund. And then I believe our success rate is usually between 20 and 40%. So like average 30. Some years, if we see a really high demand, it's a little bit less. And then the demand for applications really depends on the university hiring trends because
Mhm.
obviously early career researchers depends how
Mhm.
busy the university's been hiring them.
No, makes sense. Makes sense. Which is a good sign for this year people,
Yeah.
right? Not not too many hiring because of a lot of things. But yeah, yeah. So I think that's a good number. So just a generic question. So as an early career researcher, let's say someone came, let's say I came from one university from BC to here, right? So last this year. So it really takes me sometimes to know the people around here and there, especially for the knowledge user people, right? Which is one of the very important things for this SHRF grant. You need to find out the proper people so that it's not only in academia, but outside of the academia also. So you guys have any kind of guidelines or any kind of suggestions to find out the proper people depending on what
Mm.
type of research you have? Like we know that when we apply for the MyTech has little bit of resources that okay, you can go for here and here, here and there to find out the proper people, which eventually comes to us even based on our research, but it's not that easy for the early career researcher people. Okay, unless you find out some people who may be interested and then you send them email. This is the way we do it. But I'm just wondering whether you guys have any kind of suggestions or any kind of resources available that okay, let's say some people from SHA, some people from Ministry of Health, this kind of people maybe fit in this type of this.
Yeah.
So
So I don't have any specific resources, but I do have some thoughts. So one way would be starting with even just within the university, other professors and stuff working in similar fields and reaching out, and then kind of naturally having that branch out to the people they work with as well, if they're open to
mhm,
it. There's also, if you are working in an area that has some dedicated advocacy groups, so like if you're working in lung health, we have a provincial lung Sask nonprofit that
mhm,
is
mhm,
quite tied in with a pretty extensive network. And I believe there'd be similar things. So kind of finding out, doing some work, finding like starting with the one bigger person, and then
mhm,
hopefully they can connect you and spread out that
mhm,
way as well to help figure out network and figure out some people that might be interested.
mhm,
Um, and then I do also have for SHRF funding under the Connections program, we have Align and Mobilize grants that
mhm,
they're very small relative to establishment, $10,000, but they can give you a little bit of extra funding to like get a student dedicated to something like that. Like for Align, it could be to do an environmental scan and
mhm,
see who's all working in the area, what is out there in Saskatchewan. For Mobilize, it could do some non-academic knowledge activities. So like hosting a workshop to teach about something and
Mhm.
inviting knowledge users in that area is a way to start
That
making
sounds
connections.
good. Hmm.
And then, so yeah, they're not meant to be big projects, but they can just kind of help by getting you out there a little bit more and
Hmm.
um, getting
Hmm.
some dedicated time for doing that type of work.
No, I think that's great one actually, the connection and the align grant one. I did
Mhm.
apply the one align grant, but I think I
Mhm.
didn't thought that way, that
Oh
we
yeah.
can actually make some type of workshop type things to bring the
Mhm.
people and
Yeah.
make the connection. I think that's a great suggestion. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's more or less. And eventually if anything pop up, I will bug you guys
Yeah,
definitely.
we're always around. Oh, I should mention we're always around except for over Christmas. Our office is
Mhm.
closed the same days the university is closed. So if you email us on Boxing Day, we probably won't answer, unfortunately, but as
Okay.
soon as we come back, we will.
Okay, no worries. Yeah, thank you.
All right. So I'll stay online a bit in case any other questions pop up, either in the chat or raising your hand. But otherwise, thank you everyone for coming today. As I mentioned, I will be sending all of this information around. And happy holidays. This is pretty much the end of December for us already.